Can we be frozen and thawed thousands of years later?
Tilly.
Those topics and more on this week's BioTrekkie with the Admiral, starting now. Welcome back to BioTrekkie with the Admiral. I'm Mohamed Noor. I'm a biology professor at Duke University. I'm an occasional science consultant for the Star Trek universe.
I am Jayne Brook. I played Admiral Katrina Cornwell on the first two seasons of Discovery. And now I'm here with my friend Mohamed talking all things biology for season 4. Today, episodes 3 and 4. So diving right in with our normal protocol, Mohamed, can you point out 3 things over the course of these 2 episodes that jumped out at you biologically speaking, that you can expand upon?
Sure thing. So 3 things that jumped out at me biologically. First, in episode 3, we had this set of aliens who had been in stasis for a long-term deep space voyage. And, that got me thinking about what are the challenges with cryogenesis? Can that actually be done with people or with anything alive? That was one. The second was, just from that same episode, this is more a passing mention, but not quite sure what happens in terms of if Tilly happens to water Saru's plant. So
I'm so curious about that.
Yeah, me too. But anyway, I wanted to talk just briefly about plant defenses and some not counterintuitive things about some of those. And from episode 4, we saw this giant Tuscadian pyrosome. So I didn't actually know what a pyrosome was, but I looked it up and it's actually quite interesting. So there are a few things to talk about there.
Great. Well, let's dive into the first one. So this new species was called the Abronians. Am I pronouncing that right? The Abronians?
That's right. I can't remember.
I think that's right. Yeah. Tell us about them and surviving so long,
Sure
frozen.
Thing. So it's interesting because there are bacteria and spores that have, just thinking in terms of in the real world here on Earth, though Star Trek's almost the real world. Yeah. We know of bacteria and spores that have been frozen for tens or even sometimes hundreds of thousands of years. It's a lot less common to see something that's multicellular that's been frozen for a long time. But there was an interesting case just recently. There was a what's it called? A rotifer that was just found this past year that had been frozen for 24,000 years and was actually successfully thawed. So, and not only was it thawed, but then it was even able to reproduce.
And what is that exactly? Tell us what that is.
It's a microorganism. It's a rotifer. Okay. It's
but it's multi-cell. It's multi-celled.
It is multicellular. Yeah. So that's kind of cool. We know of tardigrades too that have been frozen for a while, but I think the longest one that's been actually documented is something like 30 years. But I think they just haven't found one that was frozen a long time ago. It's not like Darwin froze one and then somebody else came and thawed it or something like that. Right. But it's interesting to think about what are the barriers to that? Why don't we see that more often? And this rotifer is a really extreme example. I mean, that was around at the time of like woolly mammoths, right? And it was alive then, and now it's alive again. But one of the biggest challenges with freezing specifically is the formation of ice crystals, right? What'll happen is when you freeze something, it makes these little ice crystals and it can puncture holes in the cells. It can cause all sorts of cellular problems, right? So that's a big problem. A lot of species have adapted to this. I mean, there's a lot of species that live, say, in Antarctica or up in the Arctic, things like that. And there's a couple of different ways they can adapt. One, so just categories, they can be freeze tolerant, where, yes, they do actually somehow freeze, but they somehow mitigate the effect of these ice crystals. And I'll come back to that in just a second. The others, they can be freeze avoidant, where in some way they do something that makes it so the water doesn't freeze solid, or they basically mix things in with the water so it doesn't
They put antifreeze into themselves.
Exactly. So actually, it's interesting. I'm glad you mentioned antifreeze. There's this category of proteins called antifreeze proteins. And you would think they just prevent things from freezing, but that's not exactly, at least the ones I read about, that's not exactly what they do. What they'll actually do is they'll bind to ice crystals and prevent damage by them. They essentially sort of cap them off and prevent them from growing. So it's kind of cool that these things exist, right?
Yeah, and these Abronians would have figured out that very thing for themselves. Yeah. And these antifreeze proteins are known in insects, they're known in some fish and things like that. So you can actually have some of those things actually freeze and actually have ice in them, but they're able to recover from that. Another thing that some species do, and this is more of freeze avoidance, what they'll do is you know how, like, when you boil water, if you drop a little stone in there, that's where all the boiling comes from. The same thing happens with freezing, that you need these nuclei sometimes to freeze. So what they'll do is they'll get all the particles and essentially shunt them all out of the way. So you're not making this particle on which
water can freeze so easily. That allows water to get super cold. So you can get well below 0 Celsius and still not freeze, but it still actually be water.
Oh, how interesting.
Right? Isn't that cool?
You might not be finished, but just a thought came to
Please.
mind when you said that spores, like individual spores, could be frozen for how long?
Oh, I mean, thousands of years. Yeah.
Like thousand.
Yeah.
So someone has ever, a spore would be presumably, has anyone brought a plant life back from something frozen for that many years?
That's a good question.
Wouldn't
I
a
don't know the answer
spore,
to that.
I wonder.
Yeah, I mean, we did talk last season about the seed bank. So I mean, that's a lot of things that are kept at freezing related temperatures and stuff like that. So I don't know about thousands of years. I bet.
Right,
I bet the answer is yes. I haven't looked it up. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, well, that's something to look into.
Yeah, totally.
But so for these Abronians,
Mhm.
they would have had to find a way for, obviously they were very large humanoid type kind of creatures, and they had to have a whole population of them.
Yeah. So there's an extreme possibility here, which is not a good one.
Oh.
It's this process called vitrification, where essentially you suck out all the water and replace it with something like glycerol or something that doesn't freeze.
Doesn't freeze.
That in principle would work. It's never been done successfully.
but I'm assuming that would change who you are a little bit.
Yeah,
but maybe not.
It's hard to imagine there wouldn't be some negative effects from that.
Yeah. We might see that, we might see that later.
Yeah, maybe so. Like, maybe they're not who they were before. Maybe we haven't seen them before. But what I could imagine that working for is, for example, storing like a tissue or an organ or something like that.
Right.
Maybe that process worked. You're talking about a whole person or a whole individual.
No, I'm just imagining if they were replaced, all their water was replaced with glycerol. I'm just imagining, what comes to mind is they all come out and they all have arthritis or they can't move or whatever. I don't know.
All their nerves are totally messed up.
Yeah, right.
Now they are aliens, so it is possible that they're not even using water as a solvent.
That's right. Maybe that's their solvent anyway.
Exactly. It could be something else which can actually go at much colder temperatures. In fact, I mean, this is interesting that comes up a lot in sci-fi. We don't actually know what their normal pace is. I mean, yes, they're clearly not moving at that, probably what their normal pace is since they're all lying around, but maybe their normal pace is dramatically slower than our pace already.
Oh, right.
I mean, we assume things are interacting on our time scales, but it doesn't have to be. It could be a ton slower. And there's precedent for that in Star Trek. I remember the Next Generation, there was reference to some species that takes 3 days to say hello. Things like that.
That's like a cricket game,
cricket
games in England that never ends. Yeah. The Americans are like, when is this game gonna end? Yeah. And who won? It goes on for days and there's a tie. But that's funny. So that's interesting. Well, we've given the writers an opportunity to bring the Abronians back with ease.
Yeah. And we did see those ships moving around. So clearly the ships can move fast, but maybe they themselves move slow. And for them, the ship is moving at warp.
Maybe we have something to learn from them. We all have to slow down.
It could be.
Maybe we all. That's funny.
Yeah, or it could be the other. It could be the other extreme. It could be they move way faster than us, and they have to slow down even more than we would.
Right.
Hopefully,
and then they're freaked out when they wake up and they can't move fast.
Yeah. I feel like that's some mornings.
right. See, anything that we can relate to.
Definitely.
So I don't know, is that, should we move on to plant?
Yeah, sure.
So plant defenses, that did crack me up because I wasn't sure, we're going to find out about plant defenses on Earth, but I wasn't sure if that plant of Saru's would have been like some sort of Shakespearean love potion from Midsummer Night's Dream or something I went to some sort of, don't touch this because then you'll fall in love with the first person you see or some funny thing like that. But
there's an episode of the original series that's like that. I don't know if you saw it. It has like these things that are like sunflowers and they shoot these spores and all of a sudden Spock falls in love with the girl.
I think I do remember that. Well, that is kind of a Shakespeare thing. But in terms of plant defenses, let's assume that Tilly is not allowed to touch that plant.
Yeah, spraying poison
or
something.
It would jump out at her or something, eat her head off or something.
Yeah, it's interesting because we don't really know. They never really said. But in terms of what plant defenses are, what people tend to think of is they think of things like poison ivy. That's an obvious plant defense, or having thorns. There's a lot of mechanical things that try to keep animals off. So thorns, even bark to some extent, is a bit of a plant defense. Is keeping things off. I'm not sure if you know that on leaves, if you look really carefully, there's little tiny hairs on them.
Little
I'm
hairs.
using my hand. Yeah.
Yeah.
So those hairs are called trichomes, and it's thought that part of their function is to actually keep, some small insects off, because they're kind of spiky and things like that. They're a little firm too. I don't think they're super effective, but they're probably better than not having trichomes in terms of keeping some
they're not
insects off.
totally effective because you have aphids and all those other things that don't seem to care. But yeah,
exactly. And of course, there's lots of plants out there that we know are toxic or have hallucinogen-inducing effects or things like that can ward off individuals. But there's one set that I didn't know about, and I looked this up, and this was really interesting. And this is found in tobacco and cotton and a couple of other things. What it'll do is, if you chew on some of these leaves, it actually releases this chemical, which doesn't directly affect what the insect is chewing on it. But what it does is it actually is something that's very attractive to parasitoids. So parasitoids are like wasps that come in, they find other insects, and they lay their eggs inside their bodies.
Ew. So you would be inviting, if you eat this plant, you're inviting yourself to be eaten alive by wasp babies.
They're calling in the Air Force.
Oh my gosh.
Airstrike now.
And so eventually the insects are like, maybe we'll try to eat something else.
Yep.
Let's go shopping someplace else.
Presumably any insect that preferentially does not eat off cotton has more surviving offspring than the ones that do. So natural selection would then just favor not eating off these things in there. Yeah. I don't think there's a learning aspect there. Because once you've had that happen, like, well, it sucks.
Yeah, I guess, you're right. I'm thinking that they would be warning each other, but you're right. Natural selection would do it because they would all die.
Yeah.
Ew, what
I know, right? That's
a
very extreme one.
Wasps laying eggs inside of you, but
all part of Mother Nature. We have that for us, like bot flies will come and do that. I mean, my former PhD advisor actually had a bot fly lay an egg inside his head. And he went to the doctor and they said, we can take it out. He's like, actually, let's leave it. So he waited the full month for it to finish the cycle and then pop out and fly out.
Oh my gosh. How many flies flew out? Just one? How did he know? Did it look like a pimple or something? We're going to gross out.
I think it got bigger and things like that, but then eventually it just came out.
I'd be fascinated every day. I'd be like, how's it going? How's your pregnancy going?
Hold up two mirrors so you can see.
He wanted to experience some form of pregnancy.
There you go. Biologist.
We could now men, if they'd like to experience some form of pregnancy, they can host a bot fly. BOT. I don't think many people would take us up on that.
No, I don't think that many people will jump on that one. I think he was in Costa Rica where he got it. I'm not positive.
Wow.
I think that's what it was. Yeah.
Wow. But obviously it was a no danger to him.
No, it didn't hurt him at all. I probably had to put some antibiotic on there afterwards or something. Yeah, something like that. But
that's funny that he had a sense of humor and he's like, no, I want to see how this goes.
Yeah. He was interviewed on a radio show about it. And I remember him saying, oh, my girlfriend thought it was really cute. And then they actually interviewed the girlfriend. She was like, it was disgusting.
That's funny. The two different points of view.
Definitely.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Yeah. So this monster in episode 4, and we have more to talk about episode.
Oh, yes.
All sorts of, that was an interesting looking creature. It was like something between a crab and a spider and they called it a slug at one point, which I didn't relate to.
It didn't seem to move like a slug at all.
No, it was like, it had those legs, like, but anyway, so you said it was a pyrosome.
Yeah, exactly. So they refer to it as a Tuscadian pyrosome. So clearly it's not the same as the Earth pyrosome. I don't know what the Tuscadian is. I don't know if that's a planet of origin or a variety or something like that. But so pyrosomes are real. that is a real thing that you can find here on Earth. They're found in the water. There was a description there where they said it was a whole bunch of little zooids, because they said initially like thousands of organisms are congregating. And essentially that is what they are. They're not. It's not one organism, but it's essentially like a colony of organisms that kind of moves together.
And how do they agree to move together?
So they're not as active like the one on that planet where they run around or something like that. They're mostly floating around as filter feeders and going with the water. They're not so powered. They can flush water through because they're tunicates. You've heard of sea squirts? Have you heard of those? Yeah. That's essentially they're like a variety of those.
Okay.
But they're all microscopic and they all just make these long things. And they can be quite big. So the smallest might be like around a centimeter, but the longest could be 50 feet long.
My God.
It can be really, really, really big. And I saw actually an article online, they called it the Borg of the sea. Great Star Trek reference.
Yeah, right. Well, that might be where they got it. They might have read that same article.
Maybe.
But it looks like
a giant sock. Like if you see, it looks like this
Yeah,
giant
what you're
sock.
describing is great, a giant sock, but this
Yeah.
thing was more like a giant, I don't, not crab almost. I mean,
It
some sort
was.
of,
It
it
was.
was like, yeah, and it was powered by electromagnetic.
Oh yeah, yeah. It sought out its prey using the electromagnetic. Actually, one other thing on
Oh yeah,
on the original ones, they are chordates. So they're not. So I don't know if you're familiar with the groups within animals. So chordates are things that have like a back nerve cord, like we do, but we're
okay, yeah,
vertebrates, where we
spinal
have a
cord.
backbone
Yeah.
around it. They have the back nerve cord, but they don't have the vertebrae around it. So they're actually kind of closely related to us, but not,
Ah,
but less so than say fish, more so
right.
than insects, but less so than fish. So they're kind of like that. They're also bioluminescent, which is kind of cool.
Oh, I love that. I want to see that one day.
Right?
Yeah.
But can you imagine like a 50-foot sock coming at you in the water that glows?
Yeah, maybe you wouldn't be so, yeah.
Maybe
If you were
not.
in a boat, it might be good, but if you
It
were
might
in the
be,
water,
yeah.
you might be a little scared. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're unlike the ones on the show, they're filter feeders. So they're not, they're just
Right.
floating around filter feeding. But you asked about the electromagnetic signatures. Yeah, they don't track things as far as I know. They're just filter feeding. And they can flush things through, because again, they are sea squirts, so they can flush water through and move a little bit, but it's mostly going with the current, where
Just
the
a
current
big
takes
blob
it.
going with the
Yeah.
current. Yeah.
However, there are species out there which do use electromagnetic signatures of prey, where they can actually
Oh.
detect electrical signals from either the nerves or from the musculature of their prey. Sharks, sharks and rays can do that. So you can be
So
like,
they would sense it in us.
it was sense
electric-
well, if we're in the water, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. If we're in the water. Yeah.
yeah. But
Oh,
isn't that
wow.
shocking? So you can be like really well hidden and not moving, but just your nerve signals or just like little muscular things that they're like, there's something over there, and they can then home in
Oh
on it
my
and go after it.
gosh.
That's
And then
pretty
the
cool.
closer they get to you, the more scared you get, and the more your nerves are going like this, and you're like, stop. That's when
Your
you
heart's
need
beating,
a
like,
lot
"Heart,
of
stop, you're giving me
meditation.
away."
Yeah, right. That's when you're like you have to be very zen and just calm down when the shark. Wow.
Right?
So all those animated movies where the animated fish hide from the shark in a little cave doesn't totally work. Although the
Yeah.
shark can't get at you if
Yeah,
it's
that's
too
true.
small.
That part's fair. Yeah.
So, yeah, Nemo.
I was just thinking of Nemo too
now.
when you said that.
I was thinking, but he would go into such a tiny little cave, the shark couldn't go in.
That's right. That's right.
And then I start thinking of the funny shark trying to get over his
Yeah. Oh,
homicidal ways.
Poor Coral gave her life in Nemo.
Mm,
That's the
I know,
mom.
I love those movies.
Yeah.
We'll have to do the biology of Nemos. Oh, I love Nemo.
Well, there's a lot to say about clownfish. We can come back to that sometime.
Oh, yeah, right. We'll come back. Maybe they can put one in Star Trek, like just
And then we
arbitrarily.
can do a whole thing on that. That'd be
Have Ellen
awesome.
DeGeneres do the voice.
Yeah,
No,
that'd be
yeah.
cool.
That was not a, she was the, anyway, it doesn't matter. But yeah, so
Yeah, that was what I had in terms of the biology. Those things I thought were really,
Okay.
really interesting. I don't know where they came up with a pyrosome. That was a really creative thing. Like, okay, I mean, I had nothing to do
Yeah.
with it. They said, let's work in a pyrosome. Like, okay.
well, they're always coming up with something, you
Yeah,
know,
well,
I think
the
it's
writer-
amazing.
Yeah, the writers are really, really well read. I've noticed that from conversations with them. They're very well read. They're very on top of things. So yeah, I'm not surprised, but I'm still impressed as always.
Yeah. And they have their, and they have their, I'm sure they have their just like, they're just looking, no matter what they read and whatever news story, and they're reading
Mhm.
Scientific American and all these things.
Yeah.
They're probably just looking for stuff all the time.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I'm curious I have a couple questions for you, but I'm curious what jumped
you
out
do?
at you first.
Okay. Oh, what jumped out at me?
Mhm.
I sound like a broken record saying I sound like a broken record, but I loved Tilly in these 2 episodes.
Yeah.
I thought she did a great job. She's charming and loving, lovable. And it's good when a show delivers a shock. I mean, that is what shows do in the past. I don't know if it's 8 years or so or 5 years. It was something that when I started out years ago, and I've said this before too, people would joke if you were a regular, then you had it made. They wouldn't kick you off a show. They wouldn't write a character out of a show.
Mhm.
But then with things like Game of Thrones and Ned Stark and all, it becomes a thing where it's really exciting and depressing and moving and everything when they do that, because of course those are the characters that the best, and it really moves you. So I was really surprised at the end of episode 4. I was like, what? And I went to Google immediately. And I'm like, what's this with Tilly? And I looked up, oh, that she'll be back. And, so I was like, oh, good. But I thought she just did a great job. And I'm just loving the actors. I love the actress who plays Soneqa's mom. I love the women who are president of Navarre and the Federation.
Tarina. Yeah.
I love, I love all the regular actors and the ones that I knew from the first 2 seasons, seem to have just like settled in, like Wilson. Dr. Culber in episode 4 has a wonderful just stillness to him, a very just taking up his space quietly as the therapist and helping David Ajala's, book. I loved the theme of ritual and how that helps us. I loved that Book in episode 3 was given a chance to be, I don't know that you get over grief, but something that helped him so much with the grief. Then, of course, he continued to suffer in episode 4, and then Wilson gave him the ritual, and that was wonderful. And then we were promised something in the future when Ajala turns to him and says, Book turns to Culber and says, what about you? And Culber says, we'll talk about it another time. So that was promising for the future.
Discovery in general seems really good about dealing with grief, because if you look at most classic Star Trek, if there's some bad incident, there's, either it's resolved in that episode or maybe in the next episode, but it's usually like pretty quickly dispensed with, like, okay, whatever, they're over it now. Whereas Discovery is pretty good about these things really, and it comes in waves and things like that. I mean, it's much more real. Yeah, I really appreciate that.
It's very human, I think they really are trying to, they're doing what, science fiction deals with these big themes. Mm-hmm. So that's not brand new, but there's something about Discovery. I'm just loving the grand themes, like we can't do it alone, or we're all members of an orchestra. I liked Saru's metaphor because you have a first chair and you have a conductor, and they're the ones who people hear about the most. But without, I joked with you before we turned on the recording, without the timpani doing their few notes at the end, you don't have the complete symphony, or, so, I was looking at my notes, but I loved the callback to, you said to Picard, right? You said to Next Generation.
And the absolute candor. Yeah.
I love that absolute candor that, that's our way forward. And that, we have so many paths in life. This is episode 3, that paths end and change. And we have 2 choices, we can either feel like we're dying or choose life. I mean, that's almost biblical, you have 2 choices before you, death and life, choose life, So I like these big themes they're doing. I don't know if I've said every single thing that I really loved, but
you've been in a lot of shows. Funny. You've been in a lot of shows in the past, including Discovery too, where a main character has left. What's the impact of that on the rest of the cast and the show itself, things like that? Like what are things?
Well, I read a little bit about, like, Tilly is embedded in that group. I mean, that must have been really, she talked a little bit. I read a little bit about she and Soneqa doing that scene and being truly emotional, about, wow, because they have a friendship that's built over the years. And so what the characters are going through is embedded in what the people are going through. I'm sure. I think that when you've been in the business long enough, you're used to comings and goings.
Okay.
But at the same time, I'm sure that cast will feel, if Tilly, they've already shot the season, but I'm sure that they did feel when they went back, if Tilly wasn't there, it must have felt like an arm was missing, like, where's my arm? Like, it must feel weird. But yeah, I that whole group is like, now it's funny because they're all being presented as the elders, the knowledgeable elders. A lot of them aren't that old, but they're kind of the knowledgeable elders. But I like
930 plus years old.
Yeah. Well, that was one thing I meant, like, amongst themselves as well, like crew. But that was something that I did love in episode 4, when it was mentioned that at first nobody trusted them because it seemed as if they thought everything was possible. And after all those
And it
people who had
stung.
been, yeah, it stung because those people had been through so much trauma that they had shut down and they no
Mhm.
longer believed everything was possible, except that one guy, who was sitting there waiting for them in season 3. But um, I loved the idea that their holding on to anything as possible has now fed back into the people of the future. They've given that gift to those people and brought life back to them. I really like that because Sonequa had a great line when she says when they were in that, when they were in the negotiations, when she said there's a difference between enduring and thriving.
I love that line.
And
That
that
was
is
excellent.
a great line.
Yeah. It's definitely timely today too.
Yeah, so much of it. And you can really tell that they're really trying to address within their world
Mhm.
that we're all part of one orchestra, or that
Mhm.
we can't do it alone, or there's,
Mhm.
a difference between enduring and thriving and all
Yeah.
of this,
Yeah.
or the way that, Saru had the scene with the president of Nivar. They seem to understand each other. And he says,
I
how
love
do
that
you
interaction.
meditate? Yeah, that was a really nice, he said, you meditate and you're thinking in terms of politics. I'm thinking in terms of, what did he say? Faith and mercy, or I wrote it down.
I don't remember the line. I
He,
remember
he
we were talking
wrote,
about it.
you weigh
There's more personal
questions of
growth of some sort.
politics. Yeah, it was very personal. He said, you
Yeah.
weigh questions of politics. I weigh questions of faith and purpose. And
That's
I
it.
I
Purpose.
need your help because I'm having trouble here. And then she helps
Yeah.
him. And I like so much of it. I haven't, but the power of ritual is very cool too. I've heard other people talk about that in life, that if we don't have enough ritual these days
Mhm. Mhm.
in our modern lives. And if we could create rituals for ourselves to either say goodbye to a friendship, maybe that's passed, or a person who's died, or just
Mhm.
like rituals, to mark these passages.
That was interesting in Deep Space Nine. They referenced a Bajoran ritual. So Julian Bashir was dating Lita, who was Bajoran, and they broke up. And they had this ritual where they go on this vacation together, like as part of the
It's
freight
like Gwyneth
deposit.
Paltrow and what was it? Conscious uncoupling.
Oh yeah,
Everyone was like, "What?"
yeah, it was fascinating. Like, wow, that's different.
Oh,
Though I was thinking it
interesting.
was funny when Tarina and Saru were doing the thing with the hands. I was thinking it would be really funny if she went like, it would have totally broken the move, but it would have been hilarious.
Right. Oh, how funny.
It would shock
Yeah.
Saru too.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So much more mundane thought. This is from episode 3. I don't know
Mhm.
if you remember the scene where the Koat Milat lady had gotten to that Federation ship and was stealing their dilithium.
Done.
I thought it was interesting the way it was shot, because it seemed like the camera was looking up for a lot of that scene there. And I was curious. I've seen that in some shows, but I haven't figured out when is
Why
that
that decision's made.
exactly? When is that common, or is that just completely director decision, or when is that done?
Well, I think it is director decision. I think the directors are often trying to make an interesting shot, and for whatever reason, they're trying to capture. But as far as point of view, a camera on the bottom shooting up, I mean, the
Mhm.
way I've always understood that is that's a hero shot.
Mm.
A lot of times they used it like back in John Wayne movies, you make your hero look really tall and big,
Oh, okay.
it's different. This is your hero. I
Mhm.
don't think that's exactly what they were doing
Probably not there.
here. I think that, who knows, he might have felt just that it was an interesting shot and he captured more of the
Mhm.
fight, or he could capture both because she went behind him and like stabbed him and then they fell. Maybe he could catch more of the ship and the movement
Maybe.
in that angle.
Mhm.
But traditionally shooting up at someone is like a hero shot.
Okay. That makes
Yeah,
sense. That makes
at
sense. I
least
remember.
that's the way I've understood it.
Okay, I remember there's a scene in Voyager. I don't remember which episode it's from, where Janeway's coming out of the turbo lift and carrying this giant gun, and she's just walking through, and it's definitely an upshot.
Yeah,
like
right.
that,
Because
where,
she looks tall and
looks
tough,
tall
and we're
yeah.
below her.
Yes.
Like we are
Ah,
literally looking up at her.
I see. I didn't think of it
Yeah,
in that specific
yeah.
context, but that does make a lot of
We
sense.
literally looking up, and then contrary, the opposite would be. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons to put your camera wherever, but
Mhm.
if you are looking down on someone, it might be a metaphor for making them look small, or
Wow.
I mean, I think of like Game of Thrones, and sometimes they would do that from the point of view of the whoever that was the king at the time, like looking down at the people, begging them for mercy,
Mhm.
but
And you rotate through a few kings there too.
yeah, right. Yeah, they rotated. Yeah, next. Yeah, a few of them needed to die.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how we got on Game of Thrones. Maybe it was because of it was because of Ned Stark and,
Yeah.
and Tilly. But Ned
Yeah,
Stark got his
Joffrey
head
needed to
cut off.
go.
Tilly just went to Federation.
Yeah,
You
yep.
know?
Joffrey needed to go. I'm glad he was gone. But
Oh,
anyway, totally
Joffrey.
awesome.
Oh my God. I was screaming at this. I'm like, kill this guy. Please kill this guy. How about the brother of the blonde woman? He got the gold poured over him. He needed,
Yeah.
there were some bad people in that show.
Shoot, I know his name, but
What
I'm
was his
blanking
name?
on it right now.
I can't remember. Yeah.
Somebody in the
But
chat's
he got
typing
it
it in right
too.
now.
He got it too. But they
did get
did
it.
make you just, and the husband that got eaten by the dogs. I can't remember any of these
ooh.
names. He really needed
He
to
was the
die.
worst.
Sooner, he was the worst. Sooner
worst.
rather than later, he needed to die. But Stanza, she did a good job.
Stanza.
Anyway, we've moved shows.
Different shows. We love that show too.
It's still fantasy show. But anyway.
Any other thoughts on this episode or these pair of episodes?
No, I just continue to say that I enjoy it. I'm very much hoping to see Tilly again. I just was just as a shout out to Tilly, because that was such a huge episode for her. She really did a great job. There was something very still and content. She was still Tilly. She was still hilarious and lovable and funny, but there was something very solid and centered and content that came off the screen. And I loved that. I loved that idea that she had possibly gone into, she didn't do what the mother wanted with diplomacy, but she was still hoping her mom would see all the pips and then realizing, did I do this for myself, or would I just really like to be a teacher? And I think I'd just like to be I loved that growth. And Mary,
it hurt a little bit too, like, ooh, ouch. She said the saddest day of her life was when she got that, or the worst
saddest day of her life is when she achieved her dream.
Yeah.
And I know we all know that this is stories like young people just think, oh, if I could just be the CEO of Apple, if I could just be the star of a movie, if I could just be a professor at Duke, if I could just, and then we all know as a human, we get to that place that we thought would answer all of our questions. And it doesn't. The questions, we have to go inside of ourselves.
100%
You have to go inside yourself. It's like parents, this is also, but we're talking like parents would come up to me when they knew that I went to Duke, and that's our connection, our original connection. Yep. They would always come up to me when my kids were applying to schools, and they'd be like unbelievably thrilled, of course, that their kid got into Duke, but they would say it to me as if, now that my 17-year-old is in Duke, I can wash my hands and everything's going to be fine. And I'm always like, not sure about that. I mean,
no,
I don't know. Shit happens, like I'm so glad they got into Duke, but they're going to have a whole life in front of them, and it's not all going to be anyway.
No, 100% agree. 100% agree. Great points all around. Yeah, and I agree completely on Mary Wiseman's performance. Absolutely.
Oh, it was she was really great in both episodes, but obviously episode 4 is the one she did a great job. So huge shout out to her.
There was a great interview with her in the Ready Room with Will Wheaton too, and he was actually quite moved by some aspects of her performance. He felt a very strong personal connection to it and got choked up talking about it too. So
I did too. Yeah, I did too. And she talks about her mother and did I do this? I mean, I think everybody watching that is like, wow, reality check.
Yeah,
I got to sit here, reality check. But what's so great for Tilly is she's doing it at a young age, and so now she's going to have this whole trajectory where she feels, we hope, more on track with her own heart, and many, many years to be able to walk that path.
Yeah.
It's not like she's 75 or 90 and saying my whole life has been wrong. But anyway.
Well, I wish to you and all the listeners that we all achieve our path in the Zen association.
I do too.
Almost lost my light there.
Oh, it looks good still. But no, I do too. I wish that for all of us. So may we all have a Tilly moment.
There you go. Well, as usual, thank you for a wonderful discussion.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for watching. And tune in next time for the next episode of BioTrekkie with the Admiral.
Yes.
Take care.
Okay, here we go. Left-handed.
Yes.
Pretty good.
Awesome.
Pretty good. I'm left-handed.
Love it. Love it.
All right. Bye, everybody.
All right.